The sun beat down on the streets of Himatnagar, but no one seemed to care. People leaned from balconies, children perched on shoulders, and the air buzzed with a strange excitement. A procession was coming, not the usual kind with political banners or wedding drums. This was different. No one really knew why they were gathering, just that something unusual was about to happen. At the front of the slow-moving line, a massive chariot truck rolled forward, its sides dripping in garlands of marigold and silk. Musicians played upbeat tunes, and the smell of incense mixed with the scent of sun-baked stone. Then came the moment that silenced the crowd. Two figures rose atop the chariot. The man, dressed like a groom in an ivory sherwani and a turban crowned with a feather. The woman beside him, glowing in a bridal sari threaded with gold. Side by side, they stood, not smiling for cameras or waving like celebrities, but calm, focused, intentional. Gasps erupted as they reached into large baskets and began to throw handfuls of new clothes into the crowd. Then, without a word, they raised their arms and released a cloud of rupee notes into the wind. Children screamed in glee, adults scrambled. The air was a storm of currency. Some thought it was a prank. Others shouted in disbelief. But it wasn't a gimmick. It wasn't a wedding. And it definitely wasn't a political stunt. No banners explained who they were. No slogans told the reason. All that was known was this: the richest couple in town was giving away everything they owned, and no one understood why. Before the gold fell from the sky, before crowds wept at their feet, the Bhandari home was one of constant motion. Meetings, parties, polished floors echoing with laughter and footsteps. It was a house that never slept. Bhavesh Bhandari was a man of numbers, always running them in his head. Square footage, profit margins, cost per unit. His empire had taken shape from blueprints and late-night calculations. From auto loans to construction projects, he didn't just build buildings, he built a legacy. And his wife, Jinal, matched him in grace and ambition. Together, they were power and elegance stitched into the fabric of Gujarat's elite. They traveled with ease. Dubai 1 month, Singapore the next. When they returned, there were always new acquisitions waiting: cars, watches, silks. Their children, Vishwa and Bhavya, were raised in luxury, but also in deep tradition. The family bowed before Jain idols each morning, even if the next hour meant a boardroom or a business flight. Then, silence came. First, it was Bhavya who spoke of leaving everything behind. She was just 16, and her eyes shone with a calm far beyond her years. Her brother, Vishwa, only 3 years older, followed not long after. Their decision was swift, serene, and irreversible. Both declared their intention to become Jain ascetics. That night, the Bhandari home felt colder. Jinal lingered in her daughter's room, running her fingers over the corner of a notebook left on the desk. Bhavesh stood in the doorway of his son's room, staring at the guitar that hadn't been played since the announcement. And then, the day came. The children stood before a vast crowd in white robes, heads shaved, hands folded in prayer. They looked radiant, pure, and when they walked away from their old names, their phones, their clothes, their beds, they did not look back. Bhavesh and Jinal smiled through tears, but when they returned to the mansion that night, it was not the same home. The bedrooms were too quiet, the hallways too long. The luxury, once comforting, now felt suffocating. For weeks, Bhavesh tried to throw himself back into work. He signed off on projects. He attended a real estate conference in Mumbai. He shook hands and smiled for photos. But it was different. His drive had always been for the future, for his children's lives, their security, their legacy. Now, that future had chosen a path that did not need wealth. It needed nothing at all. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Bhavesh stood on the balcony of their penthouse and said the words that would change everything. "Jinal, what are we building this for?" She didn't answer at first, just reached out and took his hand. The marble beneath their feet. The breeze filtered through air-conditioned vents. The empire they'd poured their lives into. For the first time, it all felt weightless. For months, the world kept applauding Bhavesh Bhandari's success. Contracts poured in. His phone buzzed day and night. Investors lined up with offers, and real estate firms sought partnerships. His empire stretched across cities, and still he kept building. But deep inside, Bhavesh was slipping away. He would stand in the middle of his glass-walled office, overlooking acres of land soon to become towering buildings, and feel nothing. The spreadsheets were full of green arrows. His companies were expanding, but the thrill had vanished. Each meeting felt hollow. Each profit report meaningless. In the silence of his mansion, he'd find himself wandering from room to room. The house was still beautiful. Imported wood, Italian chandeliers, marble so polished it mirrored the ceiling. But there were echoes now. The children's laughter had faded. Vishwa's cricket bat lay untouched. Bhavya's sketchbook sat closed on her desk. Their rooms remained, but their presence had long since moved beyond the material. One evening, Bhavesh returned home from yet another conference. His assistant had just texted the summary. Closed the Surat deal. Land registry confirmed. Big win, sir. He didn't smile. He walked into the living room where Jinal was lighting a lamp before the family's Jain shrine. Her fingers moved with care, her lips quietly mouthing a prayer. The flame flickered. The room smelled of sandalwood. He sat down beside her. No words, just sat. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Do you remember when we used to think we'd leave all this to them?" Jinal didn't look at him, but he saw her eyes fill. "I do," she whispered. That night, they didn't eat dinner. They didn't need to. Something deeper was stirring. A hunger, yes, but not for food. For purpose. In the days that followed, Bhavesh stopped visiting his sites. He told his managers he was taking time to reflect. Jinal began giving away personal belongings quietly. Her jewelry, her collection of designer handbags, even her prized silk saris. Friends noticed, asked questions, but neither of them explained. Not yet. Instead, they began visiting temples more frequently. They met with monks, silent figures who lived with only a bowl and a broom, walking barefoot, eyes filled with peace. They remembered how Vishwa and Bhavya had looked the day of their diksha, heads shaved, hearts unburdened. And slowly, the idea that had once seemed impossible became irresistible. They didn't speak it aloud at first, but it lived between them, grew stronger each day, until one morning, Bhavesh said it over tea, as casually as he would speak of the weather. "I think we should let it go. All of it." Jinal didn't ask what it meant. She already knew. There was no announcement, no press release, no final deal. But Bhavesh Bhandari had begun disappearing, bit by bit, from the empire he'd built with his bare hands. One morning, his team arrived at the Ahmedabad office to find the corner suite empty. His desk, usually lined with fresh-cut flowers, ledgers, and framed awards, was bare. A note left for his COO simply read, "Take the lead. I trust you." Jinal, too, had retreated from her social circles. She stopped attending charity galas. She withdrew from the school board. Jewelry went missing from her safe, not stolen, but sold. Quietly. The staff didn't understand. Whispers swirled among relatives. Something was happening, but no one dared ask. Behind the silence, a revolution was unfolding. Every morning, before sunrise, Bhavesh and Jinal sat side by side in their prayer room. No longer rushed or ceremonial, their meditations grew longer, deeper. They read ancient Jain scriptures together, their voices hushed, sacred. They watched documentaries on renunciation. They met with monks under the cover of night, asking questions, not as millionaires seeking advice, but as souls seeking freedom. And the house began to empty. It started with the small things, saris, shoes, wristwatches. Then paintings vanished from the walls. The grand chandelier in the hallway was sold discreetly to an art dealer in Surat. Every rupee collected went into a trust they had begun forming, not for themselves, but for the poor, the orphaned, and Jain charities that supported animal shelters and health centers. Still, the public knew nothing. Until one afternoon in January 2024, when Bhavesh invited two local reporters to the house for a conversation. He served them tea, spoke softly, and then uttered the sentence that would ignite the firestorm. "We will give away everything, and then we will walk away from this life." They thought he was joking, until he explained. The following morning, headlines appeared on every Gujarati news channel. Real estate tycoon to renounce 200 crore rupee fortune to become monk. Social media exploded. Was it real? Was it a gimmick? Why would a man give up wealth most people could never even dream of? But for those who knew the Bhandaris well, it wasn't surprising. Their children had already walked that path. It was just a matter of time before Bhavesh and Jinal followed. The requests came flooding in. National networks, talk shows, spiritual leaders, skeptics, admirers. Everyone wanted to speak to them. But Bhavesh and Jinal declined it all. They were done speaking. They were preparing for something far greater than an interview, something more permanent than a press conference, something final. In the weeks that followed, the Bhandaris signed over deeds, closed accounts, and sold cars they once took for granted. The sparkle of their lifestyle dimmed, but in its place grew a quiet radiance that no luxury could match. And then came the most unexpected move of all. They announced a farewell, not a party, not a ceremony, but a public procession, their final act as householders. They would give away everything they had left in front of the people. The day was set, February 2024. Himatnagar. What no one knew then was that this farewell would become one of the most extraordinary public moments in modern India. It began at sunrise. A soft orange glow spilled across the rooftops of Himatnagar. Shopkeepers paused their routines. Children skipped school. Elders put on their best white kurtas. Something was coming. Something unlike anything the town or the country had ever witnessed. By 8 a.m., the streets were already lined with thousands. Flower petals drifted down from balconies. Banners fluttered in the breeze, hand-painted with images of Jain symbols and a single name that now pulsed across every whispered conversation. Bhandari. Then came the music. Doles thundered. Shehnais wept gently, and a procession rounded the corner, led not by politicians or celebrities, but by two figures who once owned mansions, who had traveled the world, who had once defined what it meant to succeed. Now, they stood above the crowd, atop a slow-moving, flower-adorned truck. Bhavesh and Jinal Bhandari, dressed like royalty, but surrounded by nothing but ordinary people. He wore an ivory sherwani and a gold-threaded turban. She shimmered in a bridal red sari, embroidered with the kind of detail reserved for the richest wedding halls. But this was no celebration of union. This was a celebration of letting go. At the first turn, the couple reached into their baskets and began throwing handfuls of clothing into the crowd. Brand new kurtas, shawls, children's dresses, jackets still in their packaging. Cheers erupted. Then came the next moment, one that would replay in millions of phones across India within hours. Bhavesh raised his hands, and from them, rupee notes soared into the air. Dozens, then hundreds. Currency fluttered like confetti, catching the light as they spun and tumbled into outstretched hands. Children shrieked, adults gasped, strangers embraced. From above, it looked like a wedding parade. But this was no ordinary farewell. It was a king and queen giving away their entire kingdom. 4 kilometers. That was the length of the route. At every block, the couple stopped to hand over gifts personally. Jinal offered gold bangles to a wrinkled woman sitting cross-legged near a street vendor. Bhavesh handed over a bag of rice to a man missing a leg. They gave not just with open hands, but with open eyes, seeing each person, each need. One child approached the chariot and looked up in awe. Bhavesh bent down, removed a gold chain from around his neck, and handed it to the boy. No cameras, no speeches, just silence and giving. By the end of the march, their hands were empty, their pockets light, their necks bare, their feet aching, and their hearts, for the first time, unburdened. They stepped down from the float as ordinary citizens, but to the people of Himatnagar, they had become something more, a symbol. Phones were lifted in the air, videos spread like wildfire, and across the country, people asked the same question: who gives away 200 crore rupees just to walk away? The answer was coming, but only to those willing to follow them past the gold, past the headlines, into the silent path that lay ahead. The sun had not yet risen when they stepped out. Ahmedabad's streets were still wrapped in darkness, the city not yet stirring. But 2 silhouettes, draped in white, barefoot and slow, moved silently past shuttered shops and sleeping dogs. In one hand, a small wooden bowl. In the other, a soft broom made of white threads. It was the beginning of a life where every step mattered. Bhavesh and Jinal Bhandari had become monks. Gone were their titles, their names, their status. No longer husband and wife, no longer millionaires, no longer anyone the world would recognize, just 2 souls, walking. Their feet touched the cold pavement without hesitation. No shoes, no comforts. The pain of stones and heat was now part of the discipline, a reminder that comfort was never the goal. By Jain custom, they would never ride a car or take a train again. All movement now must come from their own bodies. Miles of walking, from city to village, village to forest. All in silence. They did not speak. They could not ask for food, could not prepare it, could not even accept it from a closed hand. According to strict Jain tradition, a monk receives food only if it is willingly placed in their alms bowl, without prompting, without expectation. That morning, the bowl remained empty. But there was no hunger in their faces, only peace. As the days passed, the Bhandaris moved through dusty towns and remote villages. The news of their transformation followed them like a shadow. People began to whisper, "Did you hear? That couple walking barefoot, they gave away 200 crore rupees. They were invited to small temple halls. Farmers paused work to offer a scoop of boiled rice. Elderly women lit incense in quiet reverence. Still, Bhavesh and Jinal said nothing. Their communication now came through bowed heads and soft eyes. Through their example, not their words. Once, in a dusty village outside Vadodara, a shopkeeper recognized them. "You used to own half of this city," he whispered, stunned, watching them rest beneath a tree. Bhavesh smiled and folded his hands in blessing. No other response came. They slept wherever the day ended, beneath trees, in temple shelters, or on the stone floors of humble dharamshalas. Nights brought no beds, no fans, no locked doors. The stars became their only ceiling, their once silken skin roughened. Their hands, once adorned with rings and watches, grew calloused from sweeping tiny insects off the path before stepping. One evening, it rained hard. They found no shelter. They sat together beneath an awning, soaked but serene. Water ran down their shaved heads. Janal looked over at Bhavesh. He looked back. A quiet smile passed between them. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. This was freedom. Back in cities like Ahmedabad and Himatnagar, people continued to discuss their story. Videos of the Golden Procession were still going viral. Some debated their choice. Some idolized them. But the Bhandaris themselves would never read a word of it. They had given up phones, internet, even mirrors. And fame? They had left that behind with their last pair of shoes. They were learning how to live with nothing, and in doing so, they were finding everything. In one quiet village, a man asked a Jain teacher, "Why would someone give up so much?" The teacher replied simply, "Because what they found was worth more." And so Bhavesh and Jinal continued walking, never toward recognition, never toward applause, but always toward inner truth. Each village brought new faces. Each footstep brought them closer to the liberation they now lived for. They had once lived in palaces. Now they lived in peace. Years have passed. And yet, in the dusty lanes of Gujarat, in the courtyards of temples, and over late-night cups of chai, the story still lives. It's never told the same way twice. Sometimes Bhavesh and Jenal are remembered as modern saints, sometimes as a mystery. To some, they're the wealthy ones who lost it all. To others, they're the only ones who ever truly won. But one thing is always the same. No one forgets. A schoolchild in Ahmedabad asks her teacher, "Did the couple who gave away 200 crore ever return home?" The teacher smiles softly. They never had to. They carried their real home with them. Some say they saw them in a rain-soaked village, sitting beneath a banyan tree, eyes closed in meditation. Others speak of a moment, fleeting and wordless, when Jinal stepped into a hut, accepted a piece of dry bread from a wrinkled grandmother, and bowed before leaving. The old woman later said, "When she looked at me, I felt as if God himself had come for lunch." Once, in a Jain lecture in Surat, a young man stood up. Voice trembling, he said, "I was going to quit life. Then I saw their video. Now I'm saving lives instead." He worked at a leprosy shelter. No cameras, no audience, just quiet service. No one applauded, but if Bhavesh or Jinal had heard him, they would have simply smiled and swept the floor a little cleaner that day. In Mumbai, a corporate tycoon secretly donated his private island to conservation. When asked why, he whispered, "I saw what the Bhandaris did, and suddenly I couldn't keep pretending I was rich." And what of Bhavesh and Jinal? No one really knows where they are now. Some say they walked all the way to Karnataka. Others swear they saw them meditating in the foothills near Palitana. A few claim they were spotted on a forest path, quietly sweeping the ground ahead of them to protect even the smallest life. They leave no trace. They take nothing. They need nothing. They just walk, barefoot, silent, free. And if you listen carefully, on certain nights, when the wind shifts and the world feels still, you might hear the soft brushing of a Rajaharan broom against the earth. You might not see them, but they are there, not chasing a fortune, just walking toward truth, forever.